And a new storm engulfs the FBI over its claim that the president you elected could be a Russian agent. So not much going on then. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. With me tonight, live in Los Angeles, Tomi Lahren, Charlie Kirk, and Ed Henry, all the way from the cold chills of Washington, D.C. Great to see you. Exactly. Well, the swamp's hot, but it's very cold there right now. Yes. We'll discuss the latest on the border wall, what President Trump should say in his State of the Union address in a couple of weeks, and why his supporters stick with him no matter what. But first, I want to talk about this latest FBI scandal, and it really is a scandal. Look how the establishment media salivated today over the revelation that the FBI thought President Trump could be a Russian agent.
Do you think President Trump is wittingly or unwittingly an agent of the Russians?
Do you believe it's possible that President Trump has been compromised by Russia?
Do you believe that the president is a Russian asset?
You know what this was based on? They were suspicious because Donald Trump was nice to President Putin. What, so the FBI are foreign policy pundits now? It's obvious why the president is nice to Putin. He wants to have a good working relationship with him, you absolute idiots. That doesn't mean he's soft on policy like, oh, a certain President Obama who gave Putin the green light to invade Crimea and Ukraine and whose green energy policies boosted Russia's economy. President Trump keeps going on about his great relationship with his friend Xi Jinping. Does that make him a Chinese agent too? Trump has been tougher on China than any president for 50 years. But he's still nice to Xi. He's got a tougher Russia policy than any president since Reagan. But because he wants to combine that with a good personal relationship with Putin, the idiots in the FBI think he's a Russian agent. Look, the left are calling for the abolition of ICE because they think it's a rogue agency behaving in an un-American way. Whatever you think of ICE, it's clear that that description now applies to the FBI. It's too early to say that the FBI is unreformable and should therefore be replaced, but its actions over the last few years have shown that it is institutionally biased in favor of the elitist establishment and needs a total clear-out if it's ever going to win back the confidence of all Americans. I would love to know what you think of that at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Let's find out what our guests tonight think. Fox News anchor and chief national correspondent Ed Henry. He's not in Washington, he's here. Fox Nation host Tomi Lahren and founder of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. Ed, what do you make of all this? It's as many have noted, it's so crazy, this story, and yet the way that Trump's critics are playing it out, it feels to them as if this is the natural state of things.
Some of them are like salivating dogs. They're looking for meat every time. And anytime there's some development in the Mueller case, in the Russia case, writ large, we got him now, we got him. And you could see the saliva coming out of the lips, literally, in some cases. And at the end of all this, after 2 years, what evidence do they have that there's collusion? What evidence do they have that the president acted improperly at all? If Mueller has something, we need to see the report. We'll probably see it here in February or March. Fine. But the real story behind it is what you alluded to, which is the New York Times had this big leak. Why was it leaked? It's because people who are unfriendly to the president know that these transcripts of what some of these former top FBI officials told House Republicans late last year were about to come out, and that they admitted that there was basically bias within the FBI to go after Donald Trump. So they wrap up this story that suggests, they were suspicious that maybe he was a Russian agent. Why? Well, because, as you say, he was nice to Putin and all these other things. Where I would gently push back on you would be, I wouldn't call the FBI idiots. I think there are people in the upper echelons who made real mistakes. You're absolutely right. And they were clearly out to get this president. But I think there are also a lot of hardworking men and women, you would agree, in the FBI. And unfortunately, they've been tainted by James Comey and others who really screwed up.
Well, I think that we take that point completely, but it seems to me that it's more than just James Comey and a handful of people. I mean, conservatives, Tomi, instinctively want to support law enforcement. I know that's a very strong priority for you, and the FBI is, of course, part of that. But they're making it very difficult to support them with this kind of constant attack on President Trump.
Well, of course, and it's important to separate those that are doing their jobs day in, day out from those at the top that made poor decisions. But furthermore, do you ever notice when we start talking about Russia again, it's because the president is winning elsewhere? Right. So he is the one that's the victor in this fight for the wall. And he appeared great in his Oval Office address. The Democrats look like fools. And so now they have to go back to Russia because they have to distract from all the great things the president is doing and the favor that he's gaining with the American people. So here we are, back to Russia.
And Charlie, we're going to talk about the shutdown on the wall a bit later. Just on the FBI, again, what are people supposed to make of it? They keep seeing story after story of, I think it is institutional. It's not left-right. It's not partisan. I'm not saying that the FBI is anti-conservative or anything like that, but it feels to me like there is an institutional bias against the kind of anti-establishment challenge that Donald Trump represents.
Well, I think Tommy hit it spot on, where it's the boots versus the suits, where there is a high level of the FBI that has embraced a culture of corruption, almost a two-tier justice system, that if you have the right connections and have been invited to the correct cocktail parties for many decades, then you can somehow be above the law. And that is the exact opposite of what the FBI is supposed to stand for. But those of us that are students for history know that the FBI has not always acted with ethical conduct from its formation.
Okay.
You know, those of us that understand how J. Edgar Hoover put the whole bureau together, that it's always been a little bit shady. Let's just
and
put it
he used
that way.
it to go after deal with personal
like
vendettas.
Martin Luther King,
yeah,
for
went
example.
after civil rights leaders, J. Edgar Hoover. So you're right, there's a history there. The other thing, it goes deeper in recent years than even you laid it out, Steve. I mean, think about the dossier, which was all of this stuff that still hasn't been proven after, what, 3-4 years, essentially? This was stuff that had been dug up over many years. And what did they do? They used that to surveil Carter Page. After all this time, what do they have on Carter Page? He hasn't been indicted. He hasn't been charged with anything. They were following him around because they wanted to get dirt on Donald Trump. So we don't know that they have anything. If they do, the FBI and Mueller should turn it over. Let's see it.
And Tommy, your other point was correct. They bring this Russia issue back almost as a smokescreen operation when he starts to win on other issues. And the fact that you put in your opening monologue, this president has been so harsh on Russia. Let's just go through some of the facts.
On the policy basis.
He challenged the Russian pipeline to Germany that Obama was completely silent on. Obama asked for flexibility.
Can I just stop you there? Sorry, John. It's so important that everyone understands. We keep talking about energy and oil because that is Russia. It is basically energy and nothing else. There's nothing else going for it. If you challenge Russia on energy, that goes to the heart of that whole regime.
Right, and so he's strengthened NATO and has more member countries paying in than ever before. Twice he did Tomahawk missile strikes in Syria in complete and total defiance of President Putin. 200 Russian soldiers were killed by U.S. airstrikes in Syria. President Trump closed Russian consulates in America and expelled over 60 Russian citizens. I mean, and we put record sanctions on, and he also armed the citizens of Ukraine with deadly weaponry and standing up against Crimea.
But it's not going to do. I mean, you can say this, but they never ever. You know, the anti-Trump brigade will never see reason on this. They really believe he is a Russian agent.
Well, they hear the headlines. They hear a New York Times headline, and low information voters and viewers see that, and that's all they need. All they need is a headline with Trump and Russia in it, and they're already convinced. Oh, impeach. Oh, it's collusion, treason. That's all they need. They're not going to look deeper into this. The stuff that Charlie was saying goes so far over these people's heads. They don't care about any of that. They care about carrying their pitchforks, attacking Donald Trump, and because it looked like he's winning with the American people now and maybe pulling some more over to his side with his address, now they got to bring this up again, and oh, it's treason again, and end of the day.
That's right, this language they use. So, Ed, last word. Look, it's not good for the country that the FBI seems to be so politicized, and even that it is possible to make such an argument about it being tainted. That's not good for the country. How do we get that back? How do we reform it?
It's going to be extremely hard because the Mueller report is only going to divide people even more. You're going to have split camps. And what I would say, though, the long list that Charlie mentioned of the things the president's been tough on Russia, sure, those are all true. But Helsinki was not one of his finest moments. We should also put on the table.
As I said at the time.
Was not, right. And I think that's something we should be fair about as well. But bottom line, it's going to be hard to put the pieces back together. I think what James Comey, Strzok and Page and some of the other folks, the text messages, which remember, they didn't just go after Donald Trump. They went after the American people. They went after the people that allegedly smelled in Walmart. It was despicable what people at the top of the FBI, again, to make that separation from the line agents like Tommy did. And so your question about putting it back together, I think it's going to be extremely hard to reform this because it's a mess.
That's what I think. I think, honestly, a huge, as I said, just a huge clear out, not just of a couple of people at the top, but the whole of the top tier. Anyway, we'll get to that, I'm sure, on another occasion coming up. The government shutdown is now the longest in history. So what are the Democrats doing to help end it? That's Senator Bob Menendez partying on the beach. The full story is next. It's official. The government shutdown is now the longest in U.S. history. You'd think everyone involved would be working around the clock to end the crisis, but some Democrats have other priorities. There we are. This picture of disgraced New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. You saw him on Swamp Watch here. I enjoyed that one. Accepting a drink from a bikini-clad server in Puerto Rico. Menendez is one of roughly 30 Democrats who flew to the Caribbean. See, we had a debate about this. So one of my sons has kept his English accent, and the other one, sorry for this digression, is gone all American. Literally yesterday, we were talking in the car about, is it Caribbean or Caribbean? I'm sorry, I went with Caribbean, so sorry, Ben. Anyway, there we are. They're having fun in the Caribbean. And this crisis, it's of course, there are so many angles to it, but I do think it's important to start with the human aspect, Tommy, of the fact that, you know, you've got these people who work for the government, whatever our views on whether the job they do is useful or not useful, we want to cut government or whatever, it's real people who are now really suffering. Of
course it's real people, but again, I want to allude to that image that we saw because you can never really unsee that. So thanks for showing the world that, because I'm sure we all wanted to see it. I'm waiting for Nancy Pelosi's bikini photos.
Oh my gosh.
But that's for another time. Maybe she'll go to Puerto Rico next. But, you know, they were staying in hotel rooms that cost in excess of $400 a night. They're going to Hamilton Broadway shows. I mean, they're living it up. But in front of the cameras, they tell us how sad they are for the federal workers, and they cry and they moan, and it's all Trump's fault.
That's
and then they go
take on that.
party, and it's amazing what they can do when they're on camera.
The Trump supporters are the smelly folks in Walmart that I mentioned in the last segment, right? But we get to go to Puerto Rico. We have the pina coladas. And yeah, they might miss a paycheck, but we're still raking in the campaign money, by the way, because that's why they're there. They're there with lobbyists who are going to give them campaign money. So it's a whole swamp deal. And this is why I think the big picture is that the Democrats are the best thing going for the president right now. You had Nancy Pelosi in Hawaii at the beginning of the shutdown. You've got other Democrats like Menendez now in the Caribbean. And I think, you know, think about week one in the House of Representatives. They finally had power. What did they do? The MFR comment, the let's impeach him, let's abolish the Electoral College. I mean, that was only 10, 12 days ago. And we've already moved on to all these other stories. But right out of the box, the Democrats have laid a big egg.
So let's move to some kind of deal. We'll talk about the emergency thing in a second, but before that, short of that, the deal that might be done. What do you think a deal looks like, Charlie?
Well, the Democrats have to want to make a deal. And look, they're in a very tough predicament because a wall in the way that the president envisions it will harm their future political ambitions. They see that illegal foreign nationals entering the country, whether you call them line cutters or border jumpers or just illegal immigrants, whatever you call them, they see them as future voters. And even worse and more sinister, they see them as political talking points that, oh, look at these, you know, DACA 2.0. So for them, the wall is a problem.
But I just want to know what you, because I'm just really interested in your perspective and yours, Tommy. Not, you don't speak for anyone but yourselves, but you know, in a certain sense, I think you really understand the president's base and those supporters. What do you how far do you think he can go? He's already made some.
Remember, he offered a DACA deal that was, some would argue, I would argue, more generous than even Obama did in exchange for wall funding.
So
and the Democrats
that
didn't
simple
want it.
deal, which a lot of people are talking about, DACA for the wall, are you both okay with that?
Yeah, it would be, but it's not even a discussion point right now because they don't want the wall, and they don't understand the wall. They don't take the time to go and see the wall. They don't know what it looks like. They make fun of the fact that it's steel slats because they don't understand that that is the wall that the border agents want. At the end of the day, though, when you talk about what is a deal going to look like, I hope that this president holds firm because when you see his election and you see stadiums filled with people, they're chanting, build that wall for a reason. Many people voted for Donald Trump specifically for that reason. I'm worried about our chances in 2020 if he doesn't get it done. So I hope he recognizes that. I think he does. I think he's going to hold firm. Not $2 billion, not $3 billion, $5.7 billion or more is what we need, and I hope he holds firm until we get it.
Okay, and just one last thing on the test of whether he's done that. How are you measuring it? Is it literally a certain number of miles built, or that you just indicated maybe it's the money? I mean, what would you say? Right, he's done it. That's good enough for me.
It's the money to continue funding. I mean, many people don't understand. Like I've told you before, in San Diego, there is fencing. That landing mat fencing is being replaced as we speak. They are replacing it with old funds. They need more though to finish replacing that old landing mat style that the illegal immigrants are pushing down on a daily basis. They need to finish the wall. They need to add the more steel slats filled with concrete. They need to continue that progress and put wall where a wall is possible, and that will be success for this president.
And by the way, I want to make sure we put up on the screen, because Karl Rove had some really interesting data this week on the success of the wall that's been built over the last few years in reducing illegal crossings in various places: San Diego, El Paso, Tucson, Yuma. These are really big numbers in the reduction.
You know who had good data on that as well? Jim Acosta.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you see that
exactly.
tweet?
That was
his data was basically like, I'm standing in front of part of a wall, and it's really safe here.
It's the word tranquil.
So he made the case pretty well. It's just
make the border tranquil again.
And also, I think there's an untold part of this shutdown story, which is that in previous shutdowns, you've heard this screaming of, oh my gosh, we can't live without government. And I know you talk about big government a lot. And this time, it's only a partial, it's not the whole government. But there's not that much of a hue and a cry about it. And I think the real Democratic fear is that maybe we can live without such a big government.
I just want to
it's not impacting as many people as they claim.
Shout out to someone, friend of ours, Kimberly Strassen in the Wall Street Journal. She had a really, really good detailed piece on the fact that the administration really prepared for the shutdown to make sure that that was the kind of reaction.
And as you mentioned, Steve, and you're absolutely right, we can't minimize the people who are going to miss a paycheck. This is a big deal. And if this drags on much longer, this is going to have real impact. But the idea that we can't live without this government, that really scares liberals, that all this federal spending, maybe there's some places to cut.
So I just want to get you all quickly on the emergency declaration question. Not much more time than for a yes or no.
I support it. Super quick point. We've seen very little polling this week from any of the media outlets intentionally. They're withholding polling data, in my opinion, because I think he's trending positively. Notice right after the Oval Office address, you did not see the snap polls you usually see. I think that the American people are coming more in this direction. That's why you've seen the absence of polling.
Right. So you'd say yes
to the national emergency. It's been an emergency for decades.
Tommy, critics would say, fine, it's a good statement, but it means the wall won't actually be built because of the legal challenges.
I think it's the message that's most important, and like anything from this president, the message to his base and to the American people is what's most important, and it is an emergency. So if it comes to that point and they won't come to the table, this president's going to do what it takes.
It might boomerang if you have a Democratic president, though. They're going to call national emergencies on socialized medicine, all kinds of things.
Very good. Thank you all. Coming up, Republicans, including the president, are laughing off Elizabeth Warren's 2020 presidential run. My take on what the GOP has to do to make sure she doesn't have the last laugh. That's next. President Trump ran in 2016 as a populist, not a conservative, and that's why he won. Populism is popular. At its best, it's also positive, and that's what we argue for on this show. Positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community. Those were the themes of my book, Positive Populism. But President Trump needs to be careful. Some leading Democrats are trying to steal his winning populist message. Look at Elizabeth Warren. Yes, it's easy to knock her on her dubious claim of Native American ancestry. And by the way, President Trump literally just did that minutes ago on Twitter, if you're interested. But if you listen closely, she's basically running on the Trump message 2016. The populist bedrock of that platform was to make government deliver for working Americans, not the big donors and the big corporations. The focus was the middle class and working families. And now that's Elizabeth Warren's focus, too.
The middle class in this country has been treated so unfairly. We will cut taxes for all working and middle-class households in America.
America's middle class is getting hollowed out. What's happening to working families in this country? Why is the path getting rockier?
But the echoes go beyond the big picture. Look what Warren said about Washington's corruption when she spoke in Iowa last week.
We need to change the rules in Washington. Yes. And it's about money in politics. It's about the influence of money. I have the biggest anti-corruption proposals since Watergate. Yes. Yes. How about we block the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington, you think?
So I think she needs the biggest throat lozenge, to be honest. Anyway, great idea about the revolving door, but where have you heard that before? Oh, right, in 2016. Wasn't there something about draining the swamp, fighting big money, and yes, blocking the revolving door?
All of that money that's going to Hillary and Jeb and Scott and Marco and all of them, the people that are putting up that money it's like puppets. A 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch and congressional officials. They're not going to be too happy. A lifetime ban on government officials lobbying for a foreign government.
Now, that was unusual for a Republican candidate, and so was what Donald Trump said about student loan debt and health care.
We will lower the cost of college and solve the student loan crisis.
Universal health care.
I am going to take care of everybody. I don't care if it costs me votes or not. Everybody's going to be taken care of much better than they're taken care of now.
Wow, cutting student debt, health care that takes care of everybody. That 2016 candidate sounds uncannily similar to this 2020 candidate.
We pretty much believe 2/3, 3/4 of us want to see kids get some relief from student loan debt, want to see affordable health care and health care where you can't cut people out with pre-existing conditions.
Now, I suppose imitation is the highest form of flattery, and Warren agrees with Trump on the need for infrastructure spending, too.
Our roads are bad, our schools are bad, our highways, our tunnels, our bridges are falling down. You see those reports, they're dangerous, many of them. So we're going to get our infrastructure taken care of. It's going to be in jobs, but we have to do it for our country.
What's happened to federal help for infrastructure? Where's all that new money that was promised for infrastructure that would help us in building more roads, that would help us in building more mass transit, that would help us in dealing with our traffic congestion?
Good question. What did happen to the infrastructure plan? But this political odd couple even seemed to agree on trade and China.
I'm going to instruct my Treasury Secretary to label China a currency manipulator, the greatest in the world. Any country that devalues their currency in order to take unfair advantage of the United States and all of its companies who can't compete will face tariffs and taxes to stop the cheating.
They look the other way as China manipulated its currency to advance its own interests and undercut work done right here in America. China has weaponized its economy without loosening its domestic political constraints.
Sounds like somebody went to Trump University. Look, we could go on all night, but I suspect that is quite enough Elizabeth Warren for all of you. And we're certainly not endorsing her. In fact, many of her actual policies would be disastrous for working Americans. It's also true that many of Donald Trump's populist promises have been delivered. Top of the list, of course, is jobs and the economy. The poverty rate is at its lowest point in a decade, not by accident, but because of actual policy like deregulation and tax cuts. Over 4 million jobs have been created since Donald Trump took office, with the lowest unemployment in half a century and earnings rising at the fastest rate in a decade, not by chance, but by policies that boosted business confidence and encouraged the hiring of American workers. And the clearest way of all in which President Trump has delivered his populist promise for exactly the people he prioritized. Manufacturing industry has boomed after suffering for years. Over 400,000 manufacturing jobs have been added under President Trump, compared to a net loss of over 200,000 under the 8 years of President Obama. Last year was America's best manufacturing performance since 1997, since before China joined the World Trade Organization and sucked all those jobs away. And beyond the economy, and despite the endless claims of the elitist establishment that the swamp is not being drained, the president did follow through there as well. He signed an executive order banning administration officials from lobbying on behalf of a foreign government and put a 5-year ban on executive branch officials lobbying the government after they leave office. But to stop the Democrats turning populism into their winning message in 2020, President Trump needs to reclaim the mantle and he's got a perfect opportunity in just a couple of weeks' time. Mr. President, here's how you can renew your populist revolution in your State of the Union address with 5 positive promises that will help working Americans. 1, on jobs. Fight the threat of automation by guaranteeing retraining for every worker who needs it. That means boosting your National Council for the American Worker, which helps prepare Americans for the needs of the future workforce. Under this effort, led by Ivanka Trump, over 100 companies have promised to reskill a total of over 4.3 million workers. That is a great start, but you can make much more of it. 2, give us that massive infrastructure program you promised. Make a pledge that by 2030, America, not China, will have the world's most modern systems for transportation, communication, and energy. 3, rebuild America's struggling neighborhoods too, whether urban, suburban, or rural. You've already established a White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. You've got a plan for opportunity zones. These can be the vehicles for a real transformation that helps exactly the people who backed you in 2016. 4, on healthcare, you promised to take care of everyone. And then the ideological nitwits in Congress took you off course. Trust your instincts. Work with Congress to deliver guaranteed healthcare for every American. And 5th, keep draining that swamp with a move that every American will cheer. Ban foreign government lobbying. Foreign governments have embassies. They have ambassadors. Why the hell should they be allowed to use swampy lobbyists too? And why the hell should members of Congress and their staffs be allowed to deal with them? 5 populist promises that will show you're putting working Americans first. Don't let Elizabeth Warren and the Democrats steal your winning message. We know that their brand of populism will set the country back. But, Mr. President, you've got to show how your version can move America forward. Tell me what you think of all that at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Coming up, Ed, Tommy, and Charlie will weigh in on Elizabeth Warren and the rest of the 2020 race and populism. And later in the show, we talk with one of the growing number of Democratic presidential candidates. Don't miss that.
I switched to Liberty Mutual.
Welcome back, everyone. All right, let's talk about populism and the 2020 race. Charlie, I think of you as someone who's kind of really understood. We've talked a lot about this sort of difference, but we will put ourselves on the right, believing in markets and so on. But there is this interesting difference between President Trump's populist platform and the traditional Republican agenda.
Without a doubt. And you've seen some of those victories and wins just recently. I mean, look what he did with prison reform, which is something that is so atypical for a Republican to champion. But it was a problem that our prison system was completely broken, and he came forth with a solution. You look at trade. China was ripping us off for decades. Trump comes in, defies conventional orthodoxy. China's economy is down horribly because they've had one-way rigged trade deals. So, look, the idea of populism...
By the way, another thing, I didn't have time, I don't want to go on and on, but it was really interesting. When you just see everyone's up in arms about tariffs, he was so clear in the campaign that he was going to take on China and put tariffs. It was a very clear promise.
Yes. Yes, and so the essence of populism is to serve the best interests of the American people. Now, we as center-right advocates believe the best way to serve the interests is through markets and through individual liberty-based solutions. And Elizabeth Warren, however, is much more dogmatically believe in collectivism and growing government and restricting individual liberty and freedom. But we can't allow her to try to use the language that Trump used effectively. And I think that was the brilliance of your monologue.
I was saying there's the difference between the message and the policy, and the message is the same, but the policy is, disastrous. But I do think it's a concern. You don't want the Democrats running away with the kind of there for the workers when Donald Trump did such a good job of that in 2016.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about it, though. I don't think that many people that were inspired by Donald Trump and his America First agenda, I don't think that those same people are going to be inspired by Elizabeth Warren. I don't think she's a good messenger. I think she comes across very awkward, which I think makes a big difference. And again, if you look at the Democrats as a whole, she might be going on and campaigning on these things, but at the end of the day, the Democrats as a party are campaigning on very little, but if they are, it's we don't like Trump, we want to raise your taxes, we like illegal immigration. That's really what it is. At the end of the day, she can go on all the campaign stops she wants, but to the average American, that's what they hear from the Democrats,
Very
and she's not going to change it.
By the way, because you picked up on something so important there. In 2015 and a little bit in 16, Bernie Sanders, who then was the real populist standard bearer, he had a very Trump-like message on immigration. He's completely squished by the establishment. You don't hear any Democrat, even the populist ones, saying that now.
And
but Ed,
Sanders were similar to Trump on trade as well. You're right. There were some voters that are going back and forth there.
Ed, do you see any of the others being able to plausibly and in an inspiring way capture, on the Democrat side, capture that populist sentiment?
Not of the ones we've seen so far. And I think one real challenge as well for Elizabeth Warren, to some of what you've already said, is that when they talk about the hollowing out of the middle class, it's harder to make that case post-Trump because of what he's doing on the poverty rate, because of what he's doing for the middle class, what he's done with the tax cut and cutting regulations. He's had real accomplishments there, and the economy is very strong. So that populist message has to be retooled for either party, to your broader point. And so I think you laid down an interesting challenge to the president, because while he has real accomplishments that I just mentioned, and Charlie listed him out as he's an advocate, I get it, there's been failures or there's been challenges here. You laid out health care. What has the president done on health care? Yeah, they pulled out the individual mandate, but you've got to rebuild it with something else, and he's promised that. He promised on student debt. You laid it out really well, and I think there are some things where in the State of the Union, the president should get away from personality and politics and get to policy and show, A, how his policies have been very effective for the economy and the American people, and B, he's going to spend the next 2 years like a laser beam, the economy, healthcare, infrastructure, immigration. He's going to fix these things.
Look, can I just ask you on the other candidates, who do you like the look of the Democratic field? Who are you worried about? Just tell us.
Well, I love what's going on currently, where you're going to have 250,000 people running for president. Because, look, it's going to be the Trump-hating Olympics. And there will be very little to any policy prescriptions. And you might see Bloomberg get in, which I think would be wonderful, because you're going to see them call him a radical right-winger. Which will be so much, I'll find enjoyment in that. But look, the essence of this is that their message is diabolical hatred of the President of the United States. And the more voices, the more people that are thrown into that, the crazier they're going to have to be to try to distance themselves or try to get oxygen in this very, very crowded field. So,
well, I don't know. I mean, it's only the beginning, and we've already had Beto in the dentist chair. I don't know how much worse it can get than that. Anyway,
it will.
Exactly.
Just wait.
Up next, well, one of those candidates, a presidential candidate, has a positive and practical idea for a new national service program. He'll join us live next. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, a positive and practical plan to help bring America together by creating a new national service program. With me now, the man with that plan, former Maryland Congressman and 2020 Democratic presidential hopeful. Yes, he's declared. He's running. John Delaney, there he is. Good to see you again. Tell
Thanks
us,
for having me,
we'll
Steve.
talk a bit more about the wider race in a second, but I just really loved the sound of this plan when I heard you mention it. Tell us what it is.
Sure. So, as you know, this country is terribly divided, and we need to do something to restore a sense of common purpose and unity to our country. And I think national service is potentially the right answer for that problem. And what I envision is a large-scale program that we roll out, and we could get, athletes and movie stars and business leaders all behind it to help us market it. We roll it out to high schools around the country. It's not mandatory, but we create a lot of incentives for high school grads to join. They'd have three options. They could join the military, obviously, because that's an already existing program. They could do community service, and they could also be part of a new infrastructure program where we're rebuilding parks and federal buildings that needed to be upgraded for energy efficiency. Kids would get mixed with people from all over the country, so there'd be wonderful socioeconomic mixing. And I think it's something we'd be proud of. It would be unifying for them. And it would really address another issue we have, which is a very significant skills gap in this country. Last year, the U.S. military said that 71% of high school graduates were not eligible for the military because of either academic deficiencies, soft skills, health issues, social issues. So clearly, a lot of our high school graduates need a gap year, if you will. And I think this would be a great way for them to get skills and continue their education and learn something. And I think it would just have like a whole bunch of different bottom lines that would be positive for our country.
I totally agree with you. I absolutely love it. And I think that the point you mentioned just there about the social mixing,
yes,
when young people spend time together with people from different backgrounds, that will just go such a long way to healing what is obviously a very fractured country. Can you just put this specific program in the context of your broader message that you're running on in this campaign?
Well, I think the central question facing this country is how do we take this terribly divided nation where American is increasingly kind of pitted against American, and how do we start getting back to this sense of, hey, we're all in this together? Which doesn't mean we agree with each other on everyone, right? We shouldn't want that. We want a debate of ideas, but we have to work together on some of the big challenges. You went over a bunch of the big challenges in your prior segment. And so I think this is part of it. I also think we should have a president who, when they're inaugurated, looks out at the American people and says, listen, I represent every one of you, whether you voted for me or not. And to prove it, in my first 100 days, this is what I'm going to focus on. And it would be a list of proposals and legislation that already has bipartisan support in the Congress, right? Because there's a bunch of really good ideas on infrastructure, which you talked about, on health care and immigration that has bipartisan support. And then I would do other things, like I think the president should debate the Congress once a quarter for 3 hours on national television, right? They ought to be able to do it, first of all. First hour and a half, you could pick an issue, whatever issue that may be. You could talk about China. We could talk about the fact that we haven't had a new authorization for military force in this country in 17 years. We could talk about infrastructure or health care or our education system that is not delivering the results we deserve. That'd be the first hour and a half. The second hour and a half would be what you're familiar with, which is question time, right, where the president would have to answer questions from both sides. And I just think that would help with kind of transparency and help the American people kind of get to the truth. And I also think it would make politicians much more honest, right? Because you'd be out there, you're on your feet, and you have to respond to questions.
It's accountability. Look, I really, really appreciate you coming on to talk about all this. I know that there are a lot of fans of President Trump watching, and so I can't promise that you'll get a lot of voters from joining us tonight, but I really appreciate the positive and practical approach you bring to it, not that kind of divisive identity politics stuff we hear from too many Democrats, and the kind of negative sort of Trump hate that we see on the left. And I just want to really
you have to talk to all Americans.
The way you're going about it.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, I really appreciate that, John, and good luck with your campaign. Thank you so much. Coming up, liberals and the media can't seem to figure out why Americans across the country continue to support President Trump. Well, we may just have the answer. That's next. Breaking tonight, Democrats party on the beach with their lobbyist pals as the longest government shutdown in history enters its fourth week, and a new storm engulfs the FBI over its claim that the president you elected could be a Russian agent. So not much going on then. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. With me tonight, live in Los Angeles, Tommy Lahren, Charlie Kirk, and Ed Henry, all the way from the cold chills of Washington, D.C. Great to see you. Exactly. Well, the swamp's hot, but it's very cold there right now. We'll discuss the latest on the border wall, what President Trump should say in his State of the Union address in a couple of weeks, and why his supporters stick with him no matter what. But first, I want to talk about this latest FBI scandal, and it really is a scandal. Look how the establishment media salivated today over the revelation that the FBI thought President Trump could be a Russian agent.
Do you think President Trump is wittingly or unwittingly an agent of the Russians?
Do you believe it's possible that President Trump has been compromised by Russia?
Do you believe that the president is a Russian asset?
You know what this was based on? They were suspicious because Donald Trump was nice to President Putin. What, so the FBI are foreign policy pundits now? It's obvious why the president is nice to Putin. He wants to have a good working relationship with him, you absolute idiots. That doesn't mean he's soft on policy like, oh, a certain President Obama who gave Putin the green light to invade Crimea and Ukraine and whose green energy policies boosted Russia's economy. President Trump keeps going on about his great relationship with his friend Xi Jinping. Does that make him a Chinese agent too? Trump has been tougher on China than any president for 50 years, but he's still nice to Xi. He's got a tougher Russia policy than any president since Reagan. But because he wants to combine that with a good personal relationship with Putin, the idiots in the FBI think he's a Russian agent. Look, the left are calling for the abolition of ICE because they think it's a rogue agency behaving in an un-American way. Whatever you think of ICE, it's clear that that description now applies to the FBI. It's too early to say that the FBI is unreformable and should therefore be replaced, but its actions over the last few years have shown that it is institutionally biased in favor of the elitist establishment and needs a total clear-out if it's ever going to win back the confidence of all Americans. I would love to know what you think of that at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Let's find out what our guests tonight think. Fox News anchor and chief national correspondent Ed Henry. He's not in Washington, he's here. Fox Nation host Tommy Lauren and founder of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. Ed, what do you make of all this? It's as many have noted, it's so crazy, this story, and yet the way that Trump's critics are playing it out, it feels to them as if this is the natural state of things.
Some of them are like salivating dogs. They're looking for meat every time. And anytime there's some development in the Mueller case, in the Russia case, writ large, we got him now. We got him. And you could see the saliva coming out of the lips, literally, in some cases.